How good is the KV-SBR Icy Rain submachine gun? How can you mod your setup to create a shatteringly good AoE build that infinitely crits and procs frost vortexes, devastating rooms full of mobs in the blink of an eye? How is this possible without needing a single reload? And how competitive can a build like this be in boss fights? I set out to explore these questions, and let me tell you folks, this Frost Vortex SMG build is one of the most devastating and fun horde clear setups I've tried in a long time in any game of this type. What's even more attractive about this build is that whilst it's absolutely S tier at speedrunning silos and horde clear duties, it is also extremely competitive in boss melts. I will explain how the mechanics for the build work, how to create this setup via slightly different gear and mod choices based on how far into your Starcrom grind you are, and highlight some of the mistakes that I made along the way to make sure that you can optimize your build even more efficiently than I did. More on that later. Now, with that being said, let's get into it. So, how good is the Icy Rain submachine gun? The answer is simple. Absolutely fantastic, especially when you tune this thing up with the correct mods and attachments, which I will be going over shortly. If you take a look at the footage in the background, you can see that I'm testing this in hard mode silos, White Cliffs areas, and showing some extracts from boss fights. As you can see demonstrated, it is absolutely possible to build this weapon so it shoots like a laser beam, never requires reloading, and, perhaps most importantly mind, crits with near enough every shot, and as a result, procs an insanely high volume of frost vortexes, which are the bread and butter of both the fun factor and effectiveness of this build's mechanics. Speaking of mechanics, let's get in and dissect this weapon and understand why it is just so utterly devastating and fun when built correctly. This weapon has been built with some very clever interactions between critical hits and ammo consumption. Crit hits grant a 40% chance to trigger frost vortex, and when a frost vortex is created, the weapon automatically reloads 15% of the mag capacity. In layman terms, this means the more we crit, the more frost vortexes we create, and as a result, the more ammo ends up back in our mag. This results in an infinite stream of bullets and an infinite stream of frost procs. I'm sure you can see where this is going, folks. And on top of this, it also grants +1 frost vortex, and when you couple this with the right gear and mods, it ascends into new realms of ridiculousness. Now, I will explain how we get rid of the need for reload in a moment, but first, let's discuss how to enter this realm of ridiculousness that I've just mentioned. We need one integral item, and that is the Frost Tactical Vest, folks. The unique effect on this chest piece means that our frost vortexes generate frost spikes that deal frost damage of 100% psi intensity. It is therefore in our best interest to stack as much psi intensity as possible to gain the highest levels of damage output. This point leads us nicely on to where we need to be focusing our stat allocation, which should be elemental damage for frost damage and status damage for frost vortex. Apart from weapon crit damage, this is where we are getting the primary bulk of our damage numbers. Before we go any further as well, folks, I do want to add a little small caveat here, folks. I've studied and tested the damage mechanics as much as I can on target dummies and out in the field, and I've found that the results are incredibly inconsistent, and to be honest, I'm not really sure why, but I have heard from multiple sources that they are experiencing the same issues. I'm including some footage as we speak now of the target dummy, but please do take the numbers with a pinch of salt, because I don't think they seem to be consistently factoring in everything that's going on in terms of the build mechanics. A test dummy doesn't offer us the context to get the optimized DPS output data due to the way that it relies on getting kills and that kind of thing. I've also tried to decipher what the tooltips mean for various status and elemental damage types, and I'm honestly maybe just being a bit dim here, but I really can't seem to make sense of them, and they're not the easiest to understand, and I think this is due to botched translation work, if I'm honest. So if any min-maxer legends out there can perhaps shed more light on this, then please do sound off in the comments below. I will be eternally grateful. Now, with that out of the way, in terms of the weapon itself, mine is a tier 2 blueprint, and it is calibrated up to tier 10. It has a heavy style calibration blueprint, which I'll put on the screen now, and this gives us 60% mag capacity for that breathing room for the infinite ammo that I've mentioned. And I also managed to roll one with double crit, giving me 15% extra base crit chance, plus the 10% that's already on the weapon base, before we even start start factoring in the rest of the gear and the mod contributions. I'd be really interested though to see what would happen if I could lean away from this a little bit and go for the blueprint that gives 20% attack and more elemental damage instead of crit, but these are avenues that I will have to explore as time progresses. Again, if anyone's done this already, please do sound off in the comments below and let us know, is it more beneficial to do this or not? I'm not sure it will be, but you never know. Attachment wise, I've gone with the forward flash hider, compact reflex sight, light front grip and amended SMG mag, which all lean towards giving the weapon as much stability and ammo as possible. Now, I will put links in the description to this video, which will take you to the Once Human map genie, which will also take you to their exact locations. I don't want to bog this video down any more than it already will be with information. So all the locations, folks, for everything, including mods, will be in the description. Check that out. Maybe take a screenshot if you want to use that for your own farming. Now, before we jump into the rest of this build, if you'd like to stay up to date with more S-tier Once Human builds, drop the video a like and smash that subscribe button. It really helps me out, and I'll be able to keep you up to date with even more awesome Once Human builds. Thank you. The secondary weapon for this setup will be no surprise. The purple recurve bow is the way to go, and the reason for this is simple. One weak spot hit that inflicts Bullseye gives all weapons, so that includes the SMG, a plus 30% crit rate for 10 seconds. And whilst, folks, this isn't actually absolutely required, it's just a really nice boost in boss fights that allow for those weak spot hits, and it does serious work against elites. I've put some of that footage in here as well. Hopefully you've been paying attention to that. As for the rest of the gear, there are a couple of options / routes you can take here, and for this particular setup I'm using 3-piece Lone Wolf and 2-piece Heavy Duty and the aforementioned chest we just spoke about. Lone Wolf 3-piece gives us 10% increased mag size, 5% crit rate, and every 2 crit hits gives us a stack of Lone Wolf, which gives us 6% crit damage for 6 seconds, and this can stack 8 times, totaling at 48%. And as we are constantly registering critical hits, this is extremely welcome and helps us feed our damage. It also prevents the need for reload, and of course frost procs are aplenty, which, as mentioned previously, are integral to the functionality of the build. The 2-piece Heavy Duty gives us 8% increased elemental boost for the Frost Vortex impact, and all the gear is calibrated to tier 6 and gives me around 741 psi intensity. If you were to use all legendary gear, which would be ideal, and I'm going to go over that in a moment, or increase the blueprint levels, this would of course be higher and is absolutely recommended. Now, you could go 3-piece Heavy Duty, because there what you actually get is, I believe, 40% increased elemental damage with an 8-second decay. I chose not to do this because I just think that that could end up being quite useless in boss fights if you don't have any trash mobs, because it relies on getting a kill. So that's why I've decided, given my current setup, to lean more into Lone Wolf. Now, I will say, folks, I do not believe that my setup is optimal, but unfortunately, due to the way in which I spent my star crom, I effectively locked myself out of perhaps the best option here, and maybe someone in the comments can confirm this, but I would predict that a better approach to this build would be to get 3 or 4 pieces of the Shelterer set and pair that with either Lone Wolf or with Heavy Duty, because this set effectively would give us 28 to 38% more elemental damage, depending on if you did the 3 set or the 4 set bonus. And I think if you combine this with the aforementioned set, you would get a lot more bang for your buck in terms of elemental damage and the frost procs here. I'm going to test this when I can afford the set, but if you have the answers to let us know, then sound off in the comments below. In terms of the mods, there are main choices here which I've built this around, and they are Lingering Frost for the mask slot and Vortex Multiplier for the SMG slot. Again, I will put all of these locations in the description, folks. Lingering Frost gives us an effect that increases the Frost Vortex final damage the longer the duration of Frost Vortex, and this is up to 60%. And this accompanies Frost Vortex Multiplier, which takes our maximum Frost Vortexes up from 2 to 3 and increases the overall Frost Vortex damage by 10%. So a really effective synergy between not only those 2 mods, but also the core effects on the Icy Rain SMG. For the head slot, I use Fateful Strike for the 8% crit rate and the 25% increased crit damage to further lean into the crit procs and overall damage of the build. This does prevent weak spot damage, and I've checked, It does still register weak spot hit for our other procs to work. There's a cradle selection choice you can make that requires weak spot hits to trigger a damage buff. That still works, folks. You can also use the mod that gives the increased status effect here, but mine is wrongly named Flame Resonance for some reason, but I have been using the blue version of this at times and have actually settled for more crit given that that's how the build is functioning, but that option is there for you. And I also use the aforementioned wrongly named Flame Resonance for that increased status damage in my chest slot. In the pants slot, I use either Reload Rampage for the 10% increased weapon damage and status damage, and as we never reload, this is permanent, or I sometimes do use Deadshot for that 45% increased crit damage, which again is permanent because of the lack of needing to reload. It's a bit of a throw up in the air between these two, folks. The choice is entirely yours. They both work really effectively. In terms of the gloves, I use either Elemental Overload for increased elemental damage or Crit Rate Boost for more crit rate, obviously. And in the boots, I use Covered Advance for that sweet 20% increased status weapon damage. In terms of the attributes on each mod, I've been fishing for status damage, elemental damage, and damage to great ones. And when choosing between these mods, I just recommend considering striking as much balance between critting and elemental / status damage as possible. You need enough crit in this build to proc as regularly as possible the reload mechanic and the frost vortexes to make it worthwhile. But with that being said, you also want to be doing enough damage from those procs to be competitive. In terms of deviants, I'm going to keep this bit short. You can go with what you want, but I have a tier 3 festering gel wall, and I just find it so effective, folks. The quick healing, the speed in which it recovers, how much health it actually recovers, and how easy it is to put down. I can't put it down, so that's my choice, but you can also try the Polar Jelly or the Maiden for slow and more frost damage. The choice is entirely yours here, folks. In terms of the Memetic Cradle, I don't want to insult your intelligence here, folks, so I will assume that you know to pick the usual suspects, ones that mention SMG damage, the ones that mention crossbow damage, the ones that increase status effect damage and continuous frost vortex damage, weapon damage. They're all the ones to go with, folks. There's no secrets here, but there are two that I do want to point out and draw your attention to, and they are Deviation Master and Master Tactician. Master Tactician gives us a flat 25% increased damage against bosses for 15 seconds after we use a tactical item. So that's drones, projections, turrets, nades, mollies. They all proc this, and it's incredibly helpful against bosses. And the Deviation Master, this is an interesting one. I'm still trying to figure out if I'm right here. It increases our damage against deviants. The jury's still out, but I'm fairly sure the dog boss counts as a deviant, so it really helps here. I'm happy to be corrected there, but I've been playing this when trying to do boss melts and just putting the wall down at the start of the fight. It's giving me a damage boost, I think, along with Tactician, so I'll keep checking that. Maybe someone in the comments can sound off and let me know. Now, I will say, I've been playing you some footage in the background whilst discussing the Cradle and showing the speed in which this build can handle the hard mode Hound. There's definitely a skill issue going on here, folks, don't get me wrong. I can't seem to seamlessly place tactical items mid-fight. I swear the buttons don't work, but we'll call it a skill issue on my end. But hopefully this shows you just how quickly and effectively this build can work. I don't think it's the fastest at killing bosses by any means, but I do think if it had the shelter set tweaks added, as I discussed earlier, and a bit more play style refinement when using tactical items and getting the timings right during the fight, this could be done incredibly swiftly without, again, even needing to reload. If you're looking for an S-tier bingo sniper rifle build that leads into a more range style of play, check out this next video. It's got you covered. Take care of yourselves, keep having fun, and I'll see you in the next one.